Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes. We'll just let 1 or 2 more minutes time so more people can join. In the meantime, please take a moment to respond to the Menti poll, which you should be seeing in the Teams window. Good afternoon, everyone. Please make sure that you are muted as you join. We will also mute you if you forget to do so, but it would be easier as my colleague is letting other attendees join this meeting to mute yourself as you join the meeting. We'll get started in just 1 more minute time. There's still a couple of people joining us, so in the meantime, please do take a moment to respond to the Menti poll, which you should be seeing in the Teams window. So, my name is at Schoolnet Seminar today. If you haven't had the chance to still answer the Menti poll that you see on screen here, it's just a quick sort of starter question to get a feel for where people stand in regards to, well, what will be the new normal. Here at European Schoolnet, we talk a lot about what will be the new normal for schools, but less so we have focused our discussions on what will be the new normal for teacher education and training, even though it actually impacts us directly. Here at European Schoolnet, we offer on-site professional development courses for teachers in our Future Classroom Lab, which we of course have been able to run now during this pandemic. And the question is, to what extent will we just return back to our original setup, or if we will implement something new? Seems like 21 people have responded so far. Seems like that people are overall verging towards the seeing a more sustained shift happening as a result of COVID-19. So agreeing that things won't go back to the way they are. We do know that before the pandemic, most teachers still hadn't participated in online professional development. So let's see. Okay, we'll come back to that. A warm welcome to everybody who's only joining now. Let me now share my slides. So yeah, good afternoon everyone to this second European Schoolnet Academy thematic seminar on the topic of implementing blended learning in teacher education and training. A few quick rules to start out with, fairly simple. Please keep your microphone muted unless called upon, primarily during the Q&A sessions. During the presentations, you can raise comments and questions in the chat. I see you're already using the chat quite actively, so that's excellent. And if you do want to speak during the Q&A sessions, then please raise your hand and we will call upon you, and you can then use your microphone and video feed when asking your question. So, before we get started with our lineup of speakers, a quick word about who we actually are, European Schoolnet. I think many of you are familiar with European Schoolnet, but in case you aren't, we are a network, or the network, of 34 European ministries of education, with the primary aim to bring innovation in teaching and learning to ministries of education, first and foremost, but also to schools, teachers, researchers, and industry partners, directly or indirectly. The initiative behind this seminar is the European Schoolnet Academy, which we launched in 2014. European Schoolnet Academy is effectively a platform, an edX-based platform where we offer MOOCs for teachers. We have offered since 2014 69 different MOOCs on that platform, with close to 115,000 enrollments and around 30,000, close to 30,000 completions. Since last year, we have been offering what we call a thematic seminar on a topic that is linked to some activity we are running at the level of the European Schoolnet Academy. I can see our keynote speaker, Keith Topping, from our seminar last year is also with us today. Last year's seminar was on the topic of peer assessment in teacher education and training. And this year, quite topical, of course, linked to the pandemic. But even regardless of the pandemic, very relevant to the work of the European Schoolnet Academy, the topic on blended learning in teacher education and training. If you are interested in the results of the previous seminar, you can see the link here. It will also be available. We will also share it with the report that we will share after this seminar today. A quick few words about why we are looking at blended learning today. It's not just to do with COVID, but it also is to do with COVID. As mentioned already earlier, we know that before the whole pandemic, actually teacher professional development had seen very little changes in the last decade. We know that from the OECD TALIS data we have from 2009 and 2019, where in 2019 still 64% of teachers indicate that they have not participated, for example, in an online course for professional development purposes. While the first form of professional development, or the most popular form of professional development, is participation in on-site courses or seminars. But we also know from those studies that actually this is not working for a large proportion of teachers, with key barriers to attending such on-site courses, such as conflicts with work schedules, costs, and simply lack of availability, because you have to go somewhere that's usually quite close to you and there's maybe not that on offer. Now, to a certain extent, that has changed during COVID. We've seen a push to more teacher professional development happening online or in blended formats. As mentioned earlier, we've seen it also at European Schoolnet, at the Future Classroom Lab. And to a certain extent, that means teacher professional development has become more accessible. It's much easier to access if it is happening online, at least if you have the competencies. But at the same time, we've also noticed, and even though we don't have a study on this, but we've noticed that that with the rush of moving things online or moving into a blended format, often not sufficient thought is being put into understanding the pedagogies that are needed to run effective online professional development or blended professional development formats. So a lot of maintenance of traditional face-to-face pedagogies as part of that. So the question is, where do we move from here onward as we hopefully move into the end of this pandemic, into a more normal situation again? Do we maintain some of that change? And coming back to the results from the Menti poll that was running at the beginning, overall, most of you seem to be quite optimistic that some of the change we have seen during the pandemic will be maintained as we move out of the pandemic. But more importantly, will we maintain a qualitative offer of online professional development or blended professional development as part of that? And that's part of the rationale of trying to address this topic of blended learning in this seminar, trying to help and engage colleagues who are interested in this topic to understand what is at stake and how we can shape effective blended learning in teacher education and training. Now, I The topic is teacher education and training. I often talk about teacher professional development because that's the area I mostly work in with the European Schoolnet Academy. But there will be some examples later on also looking at initial teacher training, for example. So if you are from the initial teacher training field, then bear with us. But I do think that a lot of the issues we're raising here as part of professional development are equally relevant in the field of initial teacher training. There's one other reason why we're looking at blended learning at the seminar, and that's because we at European Schoolnet, we're very aware of the kind of challenges and limitations that MOOCs for teachers offer. While we are very confident that there's a huge potential here and a really good opportunity for large scale and still effective professional development, we are aware that there's a lot of skepticism about it. There are issues with accessibility. Teachers often lack the digital competence or the self-regulated learning competence to really benefit from the MOOCs that are on offer. There are issues with limited accreditation on offer, so you only really reach out or reach those who are already very motivated. And there are language issues with, if you really want to benefit from all the MOOCs that are out there, often many of those MOOCs are not in your native language. So in order to benefit from them, you need to have a certain level of often English language competence, but it could also be other languages, of course. So the question is something that we've been thinking about a lot here at European Schoolnet. Are blended MOOCs the solution? Finding some kind of mechanism to reach those who are more skeptical or who lack the competence to benefit from MOOCs through on-site offers, coupled with the international community and the high quality teaching resources, teaching and learning resources that a MOOC brings. So that's been really at the forefront of a lot what we've been thinking about at the level of the European Schoolnet Academy, and that's why this topic here today is also very topical for us. So that's it for me in regards to an introduction of why we're looking at this topic in this context. Quick overview of the program for today. We have quite a full program of some great speakers. The first half of the seminar will focus on the research findings that Dr. Eileen Kennedy from University College London will share with us. She has also drafted a literature review, which will be part of the report we will be publishing after the seminar and will be sharing with all the attendees to the seminar. We will then also engage in a conversation with Bronwyn Swinnerton from University of Leeds, talking about more specific implementation pointers for blended learning. While in the second half, we then look at 3 very concrete examples of blended learning implementations in the area of teacher education and training. Interspersed with that, there will always be Q&A sessions or opportunities for you to provide input about your own experience. Don't hesitate to do that while the presentations happen, of course, also during the chat. We will be monitoring the chat. My colleague Effie and my colleague Ina are also monitoring the chat, and we'll be picking up whatever you post during the presentations and bring those into the conversations at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor to our first speaker, Dr. Eileen Kennedy, who's a senior researcher at the University College Knowledge Lab in London, and who will be presenting the summary of research findings on the topic of blended learning in teacher education and training. Many thanks. Over to you, Eileen.
Thank you. Well, hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. And you know, this report that I'm going to make, following on from what Ben has said about MOOCs, it starts from the premise that MOOCs could be used to offer TPD at scale because teachers are good learners. Let me move to my next here. Sorry, and you know, and that's because there's the things that Ben said, that they can learn on their own and they can learn from each other. So the great MOOC participants. But that's particularly when MOOCs are designed to create sharing communities, and some of the work that I've been doing, for instance, has been about really reconfiguring how we understand a massive open online course and thinking of it instead maybe as a massive open online collaboration. But what we'll see is, like, you know, MOOCs can be really great because they can provide ideas, examples, contributions from all over the world. But what the blend potentially can add is support for teachers to adapt those ideas to their context to to model the learning and to provide a safe practice environment for teachers, as well as local communities of practice, and to provide that motivation and support for engagement that Ben was just saying that was maybe necessary for some, well, actually probably for quite a lot of us. But, you know, if we start with the idea that, you know, we're going to explore blended learning, what is blended learning? And this is not necessarily an easy thing to define. One of the authors on the topic has suggested it's a floating signifier because it can mean many things to many people. You know, a simple definition could be just that combination of face-to-face experiences when the learners are co-located, when they're in the same place, with online experience where the learners are not in the same location. But that one is not that clear because, you know, actually you can have digital or online activities within the face-to-face sessions. So maybe one of the things that we really need to think about is that these combinations should be thoughtful, and that's part of a definition that Laurillard gives, that they have to be thoughtful because technology is complex, constantly changing, and it must be a thoughtful integration because the digital is not a supplement and doesn't simply replicate parts of the conventional. Each should enhance each other. And so that's one of those are two things that I want to focus on really within this presentation. The thoughtfulness and the integration. And to assess the thoughtfulness, we need to specify both the online and the face-to-face elements. There have been some models of blended learning. Some of the literature on blended teacher professional development, not many of them, but some of them refer to these models. Rotation models are simply, you know, shifting the learning to rotate between online and face-to-face. A flex model means having teaching online but providing face-to-face tutor support. And in the enriched virtual model, this becomes a formal class rather than just tutorial support. The flipped classroom model, you know, develops that a little bit more, and it's referred to, if they're going to refer to any model, they'll refer to this one more than the others. But it's a kind of rotation model, one that's popular, and the idea is that you move what you would normally do in class online. So the lecture becomes a video, perhaps, and you move what you might expect of a homework activity, maybe work, to the face-to-face sessions. And that means that the face-to-face time becomes more collaborative and engaging. But there are other terms that people use, hybrid learning, for instance, and that's can stand in for blended learning. It can mean exactly the same thing, or it can mean something different. Sometimes hybrid learning refers to specifically, you know, online study in combination with residential face-to-face classes, like a summer school, perhaps. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it means sort of virtual face-to-face support provided by a video conference. And, you know, later we might think about that as maybe a new form of blended learning. And during the pandemic, emergency remote learning was often referred to as, or it continues to be referred to as adopting a hybrid model. And that can mean where educators are teaching the students in class while simultaneously having other students join online. And I think it's worth saying that, you know, that seems to work for some people, but not everybody thinks that's a really good idea. Very difficult, very challenging to get right. So, OK, the big question, isn't it, about blended learning is, does it work? And I think that we can probably say pretty safely that it does, that the consensus is that it is at least as effective as traditional or an online course. And there is some evidence that it's even better. But what the research suggests that we do is really take a closer look at which designs are more effective, because there's a whole panoply of things that could count as blended learning. And one of the things that comes through is that teachers like it. And that's maybe why it works well. So I'm going to talk about 3 things now that are a part of the benefit of blended learning. The first thing is flexibility. The second is reduced cost, or maybe cost efficiencies would be another way of saying that more accurately. And the third thing is collaborative teacher communities that are possible with blended learning. So for the first part, because the learning is online, then blended learning offers greater flexibility. Teachers don't have to travel, and they don't have to be in a specific place to learn. So really those restrictions that are usually imposed by time and location are reduced. And that means, as in this quote here, that sometimes you could learn on the bus if you like. But what it also flexibility is that the face-to-face part might also be somewhere the teacher normally is, maybe where they usually work, so it can be moved to the school. And that makes it even better, because then the learning and the practice can be much more closely linked, and learning communities can be created and sustained, so that you could watch a video and then implement the idea straight away in your class and discuss what happened with your colleagues. But that flexibility is provided by the online part. And when we come to the cost efficiencies, that's also provided by the online part. And I think it's important to emphasize this, because it draws attention to how important the design of the face-to-face elements are. Online learning can require heavy upfront investment in terms of time, and therefore in terms of costs. But the thing about online learning is that you can, once you've made your course, you can run it multiple times for multiple cohorts. And the only really restriction on how many people could join one of those cohorts is probably about the need for individual teacher assessment. So if you're going to assess people individually, you're going to probably need to reduce the number of people there. But that means you can, you make the course, you invest, and then you keep on running it. And that's what really causes the cost efficiencies. And it's a different model, therefore, that we need when we're planning these a blended course than a traditional course. And because institutions often think of like the course as being pretty much the same each year, that you've got one course, it keeps running year on, so you're going to need the same amount of money. But for a blended course where you're investing heavily in the first year, but then you're recouping your money, you need to shift that costing model. One of the things that happens often is that, in subsequent years, all you're really doing is needing to pay for moderation of the courses, and that job can be given to maybe less experienced educators than the ones that you're involving in creating the online course in the first place. That can save money. And those kinds of considerations make this kind of blended learning, including the sort of online part, really quite an efficient way to think about training large numbers of professionals. So if that's, teachers, could also be healthcare workers, anywhere where a government or an institution really wanted to make a significant difference. But the other kinds of costs that are involved are for teachers who participate. The research points to the complex demands of our contemporary lives, where it's very hard for people to give up their time and their commitments to family life and work to travel anywhere to study. And that can be even more the case for rural teachers, and sometimes it might be even impossible. And the researchers have pointed to this as a disincentive, excuse me, for teachers to participate at all. And as I say, you know, with the impossibility, and Ben mentioned earlier, COVID-19 has really alerted us to the idea that actually, you know, traveling is not always feasible. So we've got to find an alternative for that. And, you know, when teachers are not spending money on traveling, then there's some indication from the literature that actually that, you know, makes them feel that it's a better experience for them. And what's interesting here is that actually it can achieve a higher quality engagement with teachers after the sessions, because if they're in contact virtually, that can carry on. And we saw that in a case for teacher development in Hawaii, where the organisers had tried to follow up with teachers afterwards. It became very difficult, but when they moved to a blended learning model, teachers kept in touch themselves. So those are two reasons that really stem from the online part. So this last reason that you might want to use blended learning is really all to do with the face-to-face. And what the research says is that the face-to-face part can improve opportunities for communication, collaboration, and community among the teachers. The need for this is to give teachers support from their peers in you know, implementing ideas in their classrooms. I mean, that seems to come through from the literature on teacher professional development across the board, not just for blended learning. And that's what happens in the face-to-face sessions. Even though the online courses are often designed to encourage engagement, many of the authors say that it's sort of enhanced or enriched through having a face-to-face element. And teachers have shown some preference for studying with their known colleagues. And, you know, there are some things like working in small groups that are easier in a face-to-face setting. And if you're working in an environment with low or poor infrastructure, maybe limited access to the internet, or you know, not so many devices amongst the teachers, the face-to-face class can also be vital in enabling people to participate in an online course. So it can mitigate those shortcomings that might mean that otherwise people can't connect. You can watch a video together, for example, and then simultaneously there's trust being developed among the teachers. So that Mironov, for instance, says that you know, what's going on is that you're adding advanced interactive experiences through face-to-face. So now I think we've got a poll question.
Yes, that's right. So many thanks, Eileen. So we're going to take a quick break here from the presentation and go for some quick feedback and input from your side. So we have another Menti poll here. If you could go to www.menti.com and enter the code that you can see on the screen here. There's two questions here. The first question asks about your background, and then the next question, which should appear automatically, asks about the most important benefits of blended learning. Eileen has outlined three key ones here. Maybe based on your perspective, you have a different approach of where you see the main benefit. I'm going to switch now so that we can also see the results away from the slides to the, there we go. So you should be seeing the results coming in now. Let's see if this is working. So just give us a quick input into what your feelings are. You've just heard what Eileen has been outlining there, what the research tells us. What's your perspective on this? So we can see a lot of teacher educators with us here. Well, to be equal numbers in regards to where you see the benefit in regards to flexibility and the communication, collaboration, community aspect. Cost efficiency, okay, nobody sees that as a key benefit. Understandable to a certain extent, because of course we still have that face-to-face element. Travel might still be necessary. Training room would still be necessary, but yeah, okay. So flexibility being a key determinant here. We have 21 responses so far. Also good to get a feel of who's here. So mostly teacher educators, which is great, exactly the right target audience, some policymakers and researchers, and one school teacher. Okay, this is really a sort of core question, I think, as we move forward, allowing us to make a case either for or against changing our practices as we move out of the COVID period, either sustaining changes we're forced to introduce in this period, or moving back maybe to the model we had previously. Okay, great. Feel free to continue voting here, but well, I see still quite a few numbers coming in now.
Still nobody is bothering with the cost efficiencies. I mean, this can make it feasible. This is the thing, to actually train people at scale.
It's a compromise, I guess, but because you still have that face-to-face element, I guess cost is still a factor. So surely it's more cost efficient probably than the purely face-to-face.
Yeah, but you're reducing the face-to-face component though, so that is also and you know, it's not exactly the same.
Yeah. Okay, many thanks for the feedback. Please feel free to also add any additional points or comments into the chat regarding this. Move back to you to continue the presentation then, Eileen.
Okay, and I think I need to speed up a bit.
I'm gonna go to the slides.
Okay, so right, so okay, so on the basis of those three things, then I think what we learn from those is that learning design is critical, because we need to make sure that, you know, this face-to-face part that is where a lot of the costs come from, or that reduces both cost efficiency and reduces flexibility, it really needs to count. And yeah, at the same time, you know, when you read the research, very few authors spend a lot of time telling you what happens in that face-to-face part, maybe because we all assume we understand how that works, but it's not laid out, and it's not necessarily explained how that integration happens with the online. So what I'm going to do now is just run through. I've tried to sort of extract a learning design from some of the articles to sort of show you the kinds of ways in which people are combining the online and face-to-face. So here are some exemplar designs, as it were. Now, the first one is from a quite a, you know, it's fairly early, you know, 2008, before a lot of the current online support has been developed. This is a course that involves a wiki, and it is it's for teachers studying at universities, and there's a 8 weeks face-to-face part with a traditional assessment. So, you know, that's just traditional. And then the second part of the course involves 5 weeks of working in small groups on a wiki activity, a collaborative assessment. And what they do is that they start that off with a week to introduce the technology, and thereafter the face-to-face sessions are used for the teachers the trainee teachers to meet and to plan what they're going to do online, but simultaneously they're working online. I think this is interesting because it shows that you know, you can actually have technology involved in those face-to-face sessions, whether or not you're planning for doing something later, and it shows that you don't actually have to have a course. I mean, later on, you're always, it's mostly, you know, the online part is a fully fledged course, but here we've only got collaboration involved in face-to-face, and the teachers there found that they benefited, and they could see how to implement that idea in their own teaching, which is often an aim for much of this this kind of blended TPD. The second model I wanted to look at is this is a case from Iran, where you can see a reason for using face-to-face. They have face-to-face sessions for instruction, and then they provide a computer lab for the teachers to do practical work, because they obviously didn't have access to the equipment they needed anywhere else. But throughout this whole course, the teachers were being required to post online. And what's interesting here is that they're required, they had to pass the course, they had to post online, but they weren't told what to post, simply just to post. So that gave them quite a lot of flexibility, and it seemed to work well that they shared what they were doing, they learned from each other, and there was a good deal of co-construction of knowledge. And I think that issue about, you know, how much do you prescribe, how much do you allow to have free for them is important. And the next example is from Vietnam, where they really were going for knowledge co-construction, and they compared an online, or a blended rather, course to a traditional course. What happened was that they started off with online self-paced learning in a course to accompany face-to-face, and the tutors then facilitated some forum activities, and then included face-to-face discussions, and the teachers presented to each other, peer review, and submitted assignments online and tests online, whilst they simultaneously were connecting through an online peer discussion all the way through. What they found in this example is that this mode fared just as well as the traditional, even better in some aspects, like knowledge gain. But where maybe the face-to-face was a little bit better was to give teachers a sense of self-efficacy, which led the authors to think, well, maybe that means that we could do more with that face-to-face, maybe to use it for practical activities. You know, to maybe that's that's the best use. So then this I think this is the last of my designs. That here is a slightly different approach. This course was redesigned. It's based around design challenges, mini design challenges. So the teachers were introduced to learning design through face-to-face workshops. Simultaneously, they were asked to explore an online platform, and then they got together in groups online in using a discussion forum to collaborate, to collaboratively solve their design challenges. And what's interesting there is that these discussion groups are really they're visible to the rest of the course, so it may be made for quite a lively online environment. You could see other people working. So in that sense, then these lessons here are that face-to-face can provide an introduction to the activities, they can provide technical support, they can provide, and maybe that's a good thing, hands-on practice, you know, to implement the ideas, as well as peer discussion, community, and peer review we saw. But the online sessions, you know, can provide the engagement with content. They can you know, include peer automated assessments, collaborative knowledge building activities, and again, peer discussion and community. And there's that tension that comes through from a couple of articles about how much structure should you have, or how much informality, because if you specify things too much, then the teachers might have challenges implementing them. But if you're too loose, then they won't engage as much. And I believe we've got another, yes, another poll.
Indeed, many thanks, Eileen. So going to, now that we've heard from Eileen sort of an overview of different designs and also some of the challenges, the core question that come with designing a blended format, want to raise the question, what in your view, based on what you've heard and your own experience, is the most challenging aspect of implementing a blended design? And it actually links to a comment in the chat from Hannah Granger-Clemson, about lack of engagement in online activities. So is getting teachers to engage in the online sessions as part of a blended format one of the most challenging aspects? Or is it one of the other points that are raised there, making a meaningful connection between online and face-to-face sessions, that integration between the two, designing the face-to-face activities themselves or designing the online activities, or is it getting the right balance between structure and flexibility, or is it itself? Share your views, go to www.menti.com and the code shown here. I'm going to switch over to the browser so you can also see the results.
I think that's very interesting about online engagement. That it comes up quite a lot, how you can make it better. It's not really clear that a blended learning environment will really make that better, though. That's something that people struggle with. Unless, of course, you design it.
Okay. So we have 20 responses now. Seems to be 35% indicating getting the right balance between structure and flexibility. So that last point that you raised, Eileen, and which also then feeds into the point, I think, about getting teachers to engage in the online sessions and being too prescriptive or too loose. Always a difficult question for someone who designs a course. What's interesting is that one of the issues you raised also, Eileen, was that often there's not enough attention paid to actually the face-to-face activities in the research, and you indicated that that was partly because maybe it's taken for granted that we all know what to do in those face-to-face activities. It's more common, but it's a good question. Is it actually so? Do we actually know? Is it the same that we do in those face-to-face activities if we work in a blended format, or do we need to think a bit more about how we go about designing those activities once we integrate the online aspect into the course design? I mean, overall, if you look at the results here, there are seems to be a fairly sort of a consensus across the 4 points here, apart from the designing meaningful face-to-face activities.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, because actually the one that everyone is confident with is the designing face-to-face activities. But, you know, unless we have that link with the online, then we've got two separate courses going on. So, you know, I think that it is actually a critical dimension of this.
Okay, great. We'll move back to your presentation, Eileen, and we'll pick up some of the, there's another comment here from Hannah in the chat, so we'll come back to that later on when we address the conversation. But I'll pass back now to you, Eileen, for your presentation.
Sure. Okay, so now we're on to talking about MOOCs, and I won't take too long to talk about this because we've said we've said some things about MOOCs. I think it's important to think that not all MOOCs are the same. You know, we've got some that are a bunch of videos, or some are designed to create a collaborative teacher sharing community, and that's what really we want. I think that there's always a suspicion with MOOCs that they don't seem to have the same patterns of engagement as a traditional course online, but of course, or traditional course, I should say, but like, of course they don't, because they're not the same. You know, teachers go into a MOOC in order to get something out of it, usually, and it requires a high degree of self-regulation as a result. But you know, that is where blended learning potentially could come in, and to keep keep teachers there to maybe you can enhance what's happening in the MOOC as well, extend those discussions with blended learning, and provide, you know, educator explanation, feedback, and get people to apply those ideas to the local context, which we touched on before. But how do you do that? How do you design that blend? There's not a lot of literature about blending teacher professional development. So, I mean, there's not a lot of literature really about blending MOOCs generally. But sorry, what I'm saying is there's not a lot of literature about blending teacher professional MOOCs. There's plenty about blending teacher professional development. But you know, this quotation from the researchers here that have tried to develop a kind of a framework for blending MOOCs, a hybrid pedagogies framework they're calling it, you know, indicates that there are different degrees, you know, from low to high in terms of either the institution providing support to the learner, and also how the learner kind of align, or how the MOOC aligns with the course. So, because there's two ways here, aren't there? There's like, you could use an existing MOOC that's made for another purpose, or you could create your own. And a lot of the literature goes, you know, some of it's focused on one, not that much on actually using existing MOOCs, which we maybe ought to consider a little bit more. So you can see from the quotation here that a MOOC that's not linked to a particular course, but it's always available to the students, is a low level of integration, even though it might have lots of relevant resources. But a MOOC that's used by professors as a complementary resource for the course describes a medium level of integration, so it's an optional lecture sort of thing. And but a high level integration is where the organisers the professors are organising their courses around the MOOC, which is used as a main reference for the course. And this is called a wrapper approach, or has been in the literature. So the idea is that the MOOC wraps around the course, and the students are invited to engage with the MOOC and then come to class and discuss something that's related. What's interesting is that in this particular study, that the students sort of said that they learned from the discussion, but they didn't take part. So we've got this online engagement thing going on as well. And there's a lot of challenges in the early days. You know, it's a bit easier now, but to make sure that the MOOC is running at the right time. These days it's much more easy to schedule private runs of MOOCs and so on. So that's a problem we've kind of solved. But there's a big point that in this first study, they wanted to use the class time to discuss research articles, so that, you know, you've got the content in the MOOC, you're doing something different in the face-to-face. Actually, the students wanted to talk about the MOOC, what they were learning in the MOOC, so they wanted more time on those MOOC resources. And this is another way of looking. This is further development of that HMOOC, hybrid MOOC framework. Again, thinking about, you know, is the MOOC an optional extra? Do you have support there? That more support would give it more institutional support on the bottom, or if the MOOC is really aligned with your course content, but you're not really supporting it in the course. You know, that's that I mentioned at the top. And the wrapper approach we can see is high alignment, high support. So how do we do this for teacher professional development or teacher training or whatever we're doing? Here's three examples. The first one is in a situation where they needed scale. So the situation is that the teachers all needed to get an undergraduate degree qualification in their teaching subject. So they needed a lot of people to learn at the same time, but actually in different ways. So here the project was to specifically create a MOOC. But was it really a MOOC? Because actually it was restricted. It wasn't really open to everybody. And there were multiple pathways created within this. And what their biggest challenge was to try to create what they called an asynchronous teacher telepresence, meaning that if they could kind of design into the videos the sense of the teacher is there teaching you. That didn't seem to work terribly well. And you know, even though they had the face-to-face sessions to supplement it, the participants didn't really like it. And one of the things that that came through in this particular situation was that that some of the educators didn't really get the online the MOOC concept. So what they tried to do in the online is really just to reteach what was being taught in the MOOC, even though I've just said that, you know, maybe the online sessions could productively be used to go over some things that the students needed more work on. You know, they probably don't want it all repeated. So there's a lot of work there that needs to be done to actually make sure that the teachers themselves and their ideas about what they're doing are aligned with the blend. And the second example is in a totally different scale, not nationwide anymore, but like just a small group of teachers, 7 teachers in a low-resourced environment in Timor, that are taking a MOOC that pre-exists, hasn't been specially created, but the teachers having trouble, you know, potentially engaging with the MOOC because of, you know, access to broadband, access to adequate devices. So they got together, they were supported to get together, to watch some of those videos together and reflect on, you know, the lessons from the MOOC as the way in which that might inform their own practice. So that the teachers really valued that opportunity to reflect together, and they also liked being part of an online discussion with teachers all over the world, where they could get teaching tips. So the face-to-face was part of like enhancing that reflection and application, but also enabling the teachers to engage. And it also shows that you can do that with an existing MOOC. And if we go back to this cost efficiency thing, actually, look there, the MOOC is already made. You don't even have to make it. So that actually, if we did more of that, we would be saving a lot of resource. And this last example is for the kind of collaborative teacher professional development MOOC that I talked about at the beginning. This is an example of a blended learning case designed around a MOOC created to support teachers in challenging environments such as mass displacement. And the idea is that that it was like a summer school for teachers, again, that maybe might have challenges accessing the MOOC, but also because they were new to the idea of maybe of online learning. And the summer school was designed to have teachers meet before to sort out sort of technical login issues, prepare them for the MOOC, and have a meeting in the middle where they could explore some of the content, maybe some of the more challenging content, to have discussions about it and so on. And then at the end, to sort of go over the things that they wanted to go over and to have some summative discussion. There was a lot of opportunity within those face-to-face classes for practical work with the digital tools that were being used in the MOOC. I mean, which was partly because the MOOC was you know, one of the focuses of the MOOC was getting teachers familiar with technology. So, you know, you can do practical things. You can enhance discussion and engagement with the literature, and the research that surrounded that. You know, the teachers really got a lot out of that blended those blended sessions. So here is some summary of this. You can blend both specially created or existing TPD MOOCs, and it is much better value in terms of money and time if you're going to blend existing MOOCs. But if you're going to make your own MOOC, you might need to involve all of these people, like the teachers, if they don't understand the concept for the face-to-face teachers. I mean, you know, that's no good. So you need to involve everybody in the co-design if we're going to especially create a MOOC. And it also means that people don't want to just recreate their own, that they're willing to use this MOOC that's cost a lot of time and money to make. But then MOOC needs to be integrated into face-to-face provision, just like all the other courses or online resources that are being used. And, you know, and the closer the integration, the better. And one of the things I would say that is that if you can actually do in the face-to-face sessions some things that enhance the MOOC for everybody who doesn't have access to blended learning, then that's, I think, a public good as well. So having some activities that then feed into the MOOC activities also enhances online engagement. And there are different ways of doing this, we've just seen, but, you know, this thoughtful thing, really thinking through it all, designing it, in other words, is critical, so that they're not separate activities happening online and in the face-to-face. And I think this is our final poll.
Yes, indeed. Many thanks, Eileen. So, okay, we've received now an overview from Eileen about different examples found in the research of blended teacher professional development MOOCs. And just now in that summary, some of the reasons why this can be a success, but also we've had some, there was also one example where it wasn't really a success. So would like to get your feeling in regards to where you stand on this, where you see the opportunity offered by blended MOOCs. Are they actually a great opportunity to make teacher professional development more efficient and effective? Share your views via the Menti. I'm going to switch over to the browser so you can see the results. So results are coming in. Please share your views. Please feel free to add any comments or views directly in the meeting chat accompanying this, maybe explaining why you agree or disagree. Seems to be a slight, well, how do you say this, preference or slight direction towards seeing this as a great opportunity. I think as you can see here, the individual number of votes across the spectrum.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Most amount of people are sort of either midway or they're enthusiasts.
Yeah,
always
absolutely.
Like
and I think it's of course there's a question here about how it's done, but I think the point that you raised, Eileen, about you know, the cost efficiency of taking an existing MOOC and then building something within the environment that the teacher exists in and works in on a daily basis, the school or the local community, whatever else it is, and then providing that context and application of what has been learned immediately as part of that experience of participating in that blended MOOC. I think that can be a really powerful opportunity, and we'll be hearing actually more about that from the first practice example when Eleanor Petsy talks about this. Okay, we have 25 responses so far, so no substantial change overall. Most of you seem to see this as an opportunity. Yeah, okay, great. Let's then go back to your conclusion, Eileen, before we move on into the conversation.
Yeah, I'll just try to take as short a time as possible because I'm aware we're over time a bit.
Yeah, we're a bit over time, but still manageable, I would say.
Yes, within scope.
Oh, now see, and now I've uploaded the wrong file. Just give me a second. Here we go. Otherwise, you'd have to jump through all those previous slides again. Okay, yeah. Back to you.
Okay, cool. All right, so, you know, very briefly then, blended learning has been considered for quite a long time as a viable option for TPD because of those three things: flexibility, cost efficiencies, communication, and community. And teachers like it. They value the local context and the community. But they also like being part of a global online community, which a MOOC, for instance, would provide, because you get many more ideas. And we have learned also that online community can sustain after the face-to-face finishes. Particularly if you've got those connections made within the face-to-face. And you know, this is the thing, engagement in online activities could be designed into the face-to-face part if you design them so that you're actually enhancing, you know, you design the face-to-face activities to enhance the online, then that's the best way. I mean, because otherwise you're prioritizing, I think, the face-to-face. But similarly, you know, doing this design is not easy. It's a complex and a creative thing, and we really should be giving much more focus on designing those face-to-face activities and the integration of them with the online. And that, if we're going to do more research in the future on this, it would be really good to really make it explicit what is happening, both online, face-to-face, and how they relate to each other. So that's it. That's all I have.
Many thanks, Eileen. I think there's a plethora of things that you've raised there, and I think in the literature review that you've drafted, there's a lot more detail and a lot more examples that will benefit the audience. As mentioned, we will be sharing Eileen's literature review as part of a report that we'll publish after the seminar. So many thanks, Eileen. We are now moving to the next session of this seminar. We continue talking to you, Eileen, about the topic, but we also invite Bronwyn Swinnerton to join us. Bronwyn is a senior research fellow at the University of Leeds, who has a lot of experience with blended learning in her own teaching, but also being involved in the Blended Learning Essentials MOOC on Future Learn. I think it's actually a suite of MOOCs, so a couple of MOOCs on the topic. So a warm welcome to you, Bronwyn, as part of that.
Thank you.
And the first question I want to raise, starting actually or directing to you, Bronwyn, is to consider the kind of scenario that probably quite a few of our attendees here today are in. We've seen from the poll that there's quite a few teacher educators here, and possibly some of these teacher educators have taught online for the first time, or only more substantially taught online for the first time as a result of the whole COVID situation, are intrigued by it. Maybe that's worked quite well. Now the idea is, okay, let's take some of those benefits that come with learning online and bring them into my general course program in the future. So so if you as a teacher educator set out to redesign one of your courses into a blended format, what advice would you give to such a teacher educator? What kind of questions should she be asking as she sets out on this redesign? What's your take on that, Bronwyn?
Thanks, Ben. Well, firstly, I think anybody who's had any experience in developing online should think about, well, that was a positive experience, and what was it that was positive, what worked well and what didn't work so well, and then try to build on that. And I think when you're starting to do this sort of thing for the first time, it's really quite good to keep some sort of journal and to think about the different activities that you did do that worked well and those that didn't. But I think we should always remember that when you're designing for a blended curriculum, it's not really that different than designing for a fully face-to-face course, because you're still saying, well, what are my learning outcomes? What do I want to achieve? And what's the most effective way to do this? Obviously, with blended, there's the new thing, which is the digital and the tools that are available. You've got tools to present content, you've got tools for learners to respond to or to create content themselves. And they're things you have to think about. And I think you've got to consider which content is best delivered using tools, what's best to do face-to-face. And we mustn't, I think it was quite interesting to see the results of the Menti, where face-to-face was put as the least important because we all feel confident we can do face-to-face. But in blended, it isn't that the digital online is difficult and the face-to-face is easy, because it's the blend that's important. It's the combination of the two and how they relate to each other. So where content, where will you have a discussion? Where are you going to have activities? Are you going to have any collaborative activities? So which of these are online, which are face-to-face? Are you going to have an assessment? Is it formal? Is it informal? Will it be online or won't it? And if it's formal and it's online, how will you manage an assessment that's organised in that way? And you think to yourself, because I think as well, one of the things we do have to remember is that face-to-face isn't always in the same room. This is face-to-face now. We're speaking to each other, it's synchronous. So which parts are better asynchronous, i.e. when there isn't somebody there necessarily to facilitate it, and which are better synchronous? And I think one of the things we do have to remember when we're thinking about how to put something, do we retain those benefits of it being online? And one of the main benefits, as Eileen said, is flexibility, which means that learners can access the online material whenever and wherever is convenient. So they can do this in short bite-sized sections, or they can do it all in one go. And that's really helpful because it will depend on their other commitments, because teachers are so busy. So when can they fit that in? So it's really good practice to make it clear what the learner needs to do when they're online, because you won't be there. The teacher educator won't necessarily be there. So if you want them to read something or watch a video or participate in an asynchronous discussion forum, make sure they really understand what it is they're supposed to be doing. And I think some of the questions that you would need to ask yourself are, how much time do people have? Are you giving them the right amount of material and resources to do when they're online or when they're away from you? And then how will that relate to what they do when you come back together? So you may start out together, you may have a discussion, you may come up with some issues, and then you might go away and research it, maybe try something out in your practice and then come back together. Or you might give your learners something to read and then lots of resources to access, and then they come back together and discuss it. But what is it you want them to do? I think that's really, really important.
Many thanks, Bronwyn. Eileen, is there anything that you would add to that?
Well, just to underline that, you know, thinking about what is really needed for both parts, because, you know, one of the things that just struck me when Bronwyn was talking there, you know, currently a lot of universities in the UK, maybe elsewhere, that there's this kind of combination of mostly online but with a little bit of face-to-face delivery going on. And of course all the students said that they wanted all of that stuff. They wanted face-to-face teaching, but it seems actually there's fewer of them that show up than you would have thought, you know, once it's online, because the flexibility is actually really, really important, and people realize that they can get a lot online. So it just really, I think, underlines that if you're going to have that face-to-face session, you have to make it absolutely count. And maybe that's to help people catch up, you know, maybe that's to motivate people to carry on studying online. Maybe that's to, you know, enable people to sort of engage with something a bit more deeply that might be a bit too challenging to do online. So just think about those kinds of things. What are the kind of, I suppose, the points at which you might struggle with just having an online course, and then make the face-to-face classes immediately, you know, really directly address that. And so that everyone can see the benefits.
Many thanks. And I mean, I think that brings me also to my next question, because I mean, we've talked about what do we do in the face-to-face, what do we do in the online, but you've also raised this in your presentation, Eileen. How do we establish that link? How can we establish that meaningful connection between the online and the face-to-face activities? And of course, that depends on what those activities would be. But can you maybe point us to some more examples, some concrete examples of what that connection could look like between the online and the face-to-face? So it's not two parallel streams, but really two things that are closely intermeshed with each other. Bronwyn, sorry.
Okay.
Let's start with you, Bronwyn, again. Yeah, sorry.
I'll give you an example from I teach on the MA Digital Education, and that's professionals all over the world who are trying to improve their ability to teach using digital tools and to teach in digital environments. And the way the course is set up is it's flipped learning, and so we as teachers provide all sorts of different sorts of materials as a pre-read. And what we tried to do there is firstly give people a really good range of different types of resources. So they might have a video to watch, there may be some PowerPoint slides that we've talked over. We also give them things to read, we might get them to do things together. But what I always do is I always try to get them to think, right, what is the purpose of me reading this or watching this, or why am I reading this? And so I explain what we're going to do in the face-to-face. It's an online seminar, but it's face-to-face. What are the questions we're going to look at? What are the issues? What do I expect them to do? And so they know the purpose of why they're looking at something or reading something. And they might go away and write some ideas on a Padlet. And I think that's also a good thing. It's about getting people to be active and not passive. It's a really good way for people to engage with materials. But then they come along to the seminar and they know what to expect. They know what sort of things we're going to discuss, and they know why they were looking at doing the online activities that they were doing. And so it's that idea that you're not replicating the material. So I would never go over the material in the seminar, because I think it's really important that people don't just think, oh, well, I don't really need to read it, because they'll just go over it. I think there's an expectation, and we provide that expectation at the outset. We say, this is what we expect you to do, engage with that material, come to the seminar, and then we discuss it. And if they come along and they haven't, they don't get as much out of it, and they know they don't. And it's that idea that there's a real connection between what's online and what happens face to face.
Yeah. So can I just yeah, I think some of the things, if we're talking about a here, then, and it's a good MOOC and it's got lots of collaborative activities in it. One of the things that you can do online is take one of those activities and support. And I think that's really what Bronwyn was suggesting there, like support the students to engage with it. Maybe it's something that's going to come up in a bit. And I know of one of the MOOCs that I've created about research methods. I know some colleagues used a particular activity which is about analysing data. Where in the MOOC I'd set it up as like, you know, sort of get into groups, find some, just individually look at this thing and add some words to a word cloud activity based on the themes that you thought were arising there. My colleague did that in class, so the students were doing it in class, adding it to the word cloud activity in the MOOC. So you've already got those activities structured, but of course it's easier to do and more fun to engage in it together. So why not do those activities face to face, and then anybody who can't get to the face to face will see other people have engaged. And then, of course, the global community adds to it. So there's there's value added from that. And I think those are the things. Take a discussion prompt, maybe, and discuss it in class, and then encourage the students to, after they've discussed the activity, to contribute to the online discussion as well. Because, you know, maybe they're a little bit shy at the beginning, you know, you can give them more confidence. So I think it's, actually work with what you've got is the advice.
Yeah, in one of my sessions, we were talking about the different definitions of blended learning and hybrid learning and all those sorts of things. So we used the Blended Learning Essentials MOOC, and we took a lot of the comments where people from all over the world had given different definitions. And so we brought that into the face-to-face and said, what do you think of these different definitions? Why do you think people have different views of this? And that was really useful for them to engage with the way other people had that discussion.
Many thanks. I think some really nice concrete examples there to draw from. Unfortunately, I do need to move on because we are a bit late on the time, but we'll come back to some of these issues later on when we look at the practice examples. I'm quite sure of that. So the next question I want to raise to you, and it's one that's also come up in the chat raised by Hannah from the European Commission, and that is getting learners to engage in online activities, particularly when they're unfamiliar or maybe lack certain experience of online settings, can be really difficult. And if you combine the online with the face-to-face, such learners might neglect the online activities and just focus on the face-to-face setting. how could teacher educators address this challenge? I mean, Hannah in the chat pointed to this example of where if you go to an online event and you've paid, if you go to an online event, it's so easy to get distracted there. You know, you'll be multitasking, maybe as many attendees here, or there might be an email coming in or something else happens. But if you actually pay, you know, your ticket, your hotel, and you travel somewhere, you're much more committed to that. And yeah, how could that kind of problem, could that kind of issue maybe be addressed if in a blended context?
Is that for me?
Yeah, let's start with you, Eileen. Yeah.
Yeah, big problem. But in a number of instances, I mean, picking up on the example of if you paid, if you're making your blended course, if you make the I don't know, not all courses have a pass fail kind of thing or completion, but if you're making your blended course assessment dependent on their engagement online, that does seem to work. So I have in pre-service teacher development using a MOOC, I've known people to require the students to take screenshots of their contributions to discussion. So I mean, that you know, and that does seem to work. The thing is, online, I think really in the end, we need to give people a bit of a, we need to reward them, you know, for doing it. They need to get that pleasure from doing it. And you can't get that until you've actually made that step. And I think that's the difficulty. So, you know, as I said before, you can prepare them for it in the face-to-face class and get them to actually do it, because the minute you do it and then you get people liking your comment or replying to your comment, then all of a sudden it becomes a very exciting and valuable thing to do, but you might not be very confident at the beginning. So it's much more difficult to write something down than it is to say in class, and you know, that's even hard anyway. So we kind of need to sort of nurture people to do it and show them that it's a valuable thing to do.
Excellent. Many thanks, Eileen. Bronwyn, anything to add to that?
I was just going to say, I agree. It's about making it meaningful and that your learners see that it's valuable. And if it's an online environment they're not used to, well, go and show them in the face-to-face, show them what to expect, what it will be like, and what sort of things they might be expected to do. Because I think a lot of this can be fear of the unknown when they haven't been into a particular environment. And I do think it is. It's with MOOCs, it's people can get quite overwhelmed by them. But when they go in and see that actually they can be involved in a quite nice discussion, and that some of the resources are just so interesting to watch and to read and to get involved with, and the activities you can do in there, I think it really does encourage people to get involved with them. But I think as well that whenever somebody decides to come on a course, then you do have to keep reminding them as to what it is they're trying to achieve, and that the online matters, and then it's explaining that the online matters. And I think if we talk about how people can be supported in this, it's about their line managers giving them specific time for it. If you go to an all-day training session, then you're not in the office, you're not in the school, you're not in the classroom, and that's seen as being okay. But if you're then doing it online, there's this idea that you'll do it in your own time. And I just don't think that's sustainable. I think line managers have to give their staff enough time to do this in office hours.
Indeed, that's a real problem also for teachers. I mean, we see it in our activities at European Schoolnet again, where the school heads don't give the teachers actually time off to attend the professional development that's happening online, while they would have no problem in giving them time off if they would have to attend somewhere face to face. So absolutely excellent. Great. I do want to come to one quick sort of final question. If you could be fairly brief in regards to the answers to that, and that is really targeted at the policymaker audience here today, and also the administrators or managers of teacher educational organizations. What can they do to facilitate the implementation of blended learning in teacher training? Or in other words, what type of support is necessary for teacher educators to implement blended learning? Let's start with you, Bronwyn.
I think, well, I think firstly, making time. to attend training. But for those people who are developing blended learning, firstly, you've got to really think about their level of digital literacy. Do they have the digital skills in order to be able to do this? Do they have the correct devices? Do they have the Wi-Fi in the environment that they work in? Do they know how to use these tools? Do they have good examples of best practice and case studies of best practice? But I think another thing that's really key is that people think that putting some material online, creating a blended learning course, isn't particularly time consuming. But even if you just think about a 45-minute lecture, say, if that's how you were doing it, you might not do that with TPD, but say you were, and then you wanted to create that into an online resource, you would create the slides, you would speak over it in a video, you would then have to try to you'd have to get subtitles put on it because it needs to be accessible, because you need to make sure that all of this stuff is accessible to all sorts of different types of learners. And then you would have to check that even if it went through some software, you'd have to check that the subtitles were correct. These things take such a long time. And so I think institutions really need to give their staff who are developing blended learning the time to do it, because otherwise it's rushed, and that's where problems happen, because the people who are developing blended learning need to feel confident with what they've developed.
Many thanks. Very important message there. Eileen, anything to add from your side?
Well, I think it's around this idea of giving the support to teachers to understand the value of this kind of approach, and as Bronwyn said, how much is involved. And I mentioned earlier the idea of co-design. I mean, because like making a MOOC is such a huge, big enterprise, and yet it will save money in the long run. But it's a huge enterprise, and it is a source of frustration sometimes to me that, you know, there are these wonderful MOOCs existing, but what people want to do within their own environment is recreate it, do it again. Do you know? Because and what would be better is to get everybody who's interested to co-design something, develop something that could be shared and could be adapted in local environments by different people in the ways in which we've just been discussing. For policymakers and teacher managers to sort of get behind this idea that actually pooling resources involving many more people in the development of something that is so challenging is actually worth it in the long run. And I think that with that support, then teachers would be willing to do it. I mean, teachers like to work together, you know, and we're, you know, too often on our own in a classroom. So, you know, like if it's believing in the idea of it, and it's a little bit different from what we're used to. But, you know, as we've seen, times are changing, and we can change along with them.
Excellent, many thanks. I think some very important messages from both of you there. So we are a little bit behind schedule, but we still have some time for some questions. There haven't been too many questions or comments in the chat, but please use the opportunity, ask a question to Eileen or Bronwyn or myself, or just share your experience. What are your answers to these questions? What kind of support, if you're a teacher educator, would you want to implement blended learning? Yeah, please, floor is yours. You can raise your hand and you can you then just speak using the microphone, or you can put a question or comment in the chat. While we wait for some people to step forward in this regard, I want to highlight this comment from Monica. She asks, or she comments, what people might have a problem with is to be identified in MOOC discussion as who they are, and they do not want to make any mistakes and face some kind of mockery for their opinions. And I think that's a very important point, which is also, I think, what you raised, Eileen, that in a way, by giving them the opportunity in the on-site to maybe do it together in a more safer or familiar environment, to then also take that step into that online sphere, into the public, so to speak, in written form, is or can be very helpful.
I was just
Sorry.
going to tell you about our experience of using a MOOC with undergraduate medical students. So we, at Leeds University, one of our colleagues developed a MOOC in anatomy and then used it with medical students. So they had to make sure the timing was right. And the students used it really well and they liked it. But what they didn't do was take part in the discussion forums, because they said, well, we're just students. Why would, because the MOOC was aimed at medical professionals as well. What do we know? We don't know enough to be able to comment in the discussion forums. And so that's a really, that thing about thinking that they might make a mistake. But it's also important to realise that this group of students already had a community. They didn't need to use it in the MOOC. And so that's, really interesting to think about. If you've got teachers who already know each other, they might not use that part of that.
That's yes, but then we also need, that's true. I agree with everything you're saying there, but we also need to be clear about what the point of engaging in the discussion is. And the point is that, we've just said it's more difficult to write down your ideas, but in the process of writing down your ideas, then you learn, that you learn what you think, you clarify your ideas. It's critical to, particularly for teachers, because, much of our work is like theorizing and acting, and to have that opportunity to really reflect and write down and realize how long it takes. And again, having enough time to do it is critical there as well. I think that these are all of the things that we should be emphasizing with this engagement with MOOCs. It's not just like we like to see the discussion. People learn through discussion.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then it can be evidence of your learning as well. So you could use that as part of a portfolio. I think that's where we ought to be going with this, using those discussion comments meaningfully.
I do hope that some of the audience will share their experience or raise some additional questions. It's great to have this conversation, of course, but I'm sure there are many colleagues here in this meetings who also have valuable experience and insight. So please do take the opportunity.
Monica.
Okay. Yes, Monica, please. The floor is yours.
Hello. So we are not doing a MOOC, but we do webinars online. And the problem we have is that really teachers are not exactly active online. And if we ask any questions, they're not exactly willing to answer. It's very similar to this one, that nobody wants to ask questions. Okay, so this is perhaps the challenge we have to somehow overcome.
Yeah.
Okay, many thanks for that comment and question, Monica. Eileen, Bronwyn, anything that you can respond to that? I guess it's not just a blended learning question, more an online learning kind of question, but maybe the blended aspect can come into there.
I've been thinking about this a lot because I get it from, colleagues saying a similar thing, as you say, like in all kinds of online learning, well, especially like video conferencing. I'll pass this over to Bronwyn in a sec. But, one of the things that I think that we could do more of in these online things is using annotation, because it seems if you start off with your camera off and your mic, it's quite a big deal to sort of jump in and start speaking, but it's less of a big deal to sort of move a cursor around on a whiteboard or type on a whiteboard, and at least then when you're the facilitator of that video conference, if you see some activity, at least it makes you think that you're not actually talking into the void, so I think that kind of thing can be effective. But maybe Bronwyn's got some tips from the way she does her video conferences.
Well, it's interesting. We were talking about this last week because it became a big discussion in our symposium, and talking about how some people are fine putting their camera on. They're absolutely fine putting their camera on and talking, and other people really aren't. And I mentioned the example of the previous night I'd been teaching on the master's course, and at lunchtime, because I do a lunchtime session and an evening session because we've got people in different time zones. The lunchtime session, everybody had their cameras on and were chatting away. And in the evening, no one did. And we were talking about research methods and how you would interview somebody online and whether you would capture the video or just the audio. And somebody said, well, I wouldn't video it at all, because when you speak on video, you can't be as honest. And they just had this idea about showing their face. And I think you can use lots of different ways to get people to be interactive online. So you can use Padlets, you can use whiteboards, like you say, and you do have to try to just tease that out of people. And I know that people within the university have started saying, let's not all sit with our cameras off and yes, your audio off, fine, until you're speaking, but let's all have our cameras on, because we know that the bandwidth is okay for a certain number of people. But we all started out in March saying, oh, all cameras have to go off.
And I think if you think about teachers in particular, I can imagine that it's also really a confidence issue, speaking to a large audience and not necessarily seeing that audience, not being aware who that audience exactly is. So I'm really curious also about the answer that Eleanor Petsy, our next speaker after the coffee break, will tell us about, because I think she's organized some study groups alongside MOOCs, and I'd be curious to see how that has changed the perception of the participants of her study group on their ability to engage in a synchronous or asynchronous online environment. Okay, I'm gonna stop here now, because I mean, we are 5 minutes over time for the coffee break. Please, if you still come up with questions or comments in the meantime, don't hesitate to put them in the chat or bring them up later on. We're going to break for coffee now, a short break of 10 minutes time. So we'll be back here at 16:40 Central European time, so in 10 minutes time at 22:05. Many thanks, and see you there. And many thanks to both Bronwyn and Eileen for the contributions at this session.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We have 20 to 5 now, so we'll continue with the second part of this thematic seminar. In the second half of the seminar, we will be looking at three concrete examples of blended learning in practice in the area of teacher education and training. We have three quite different settings in these examples. One we hear from the use of MOOCs in schools from a teacher who's been using MOOCs in schools. The other will be hearing about blended learning in the Danish vocational education sector, teacher training in the vocational education sector. And in the third example, we'll look at initial teacher training context in Austria using blended MOOCs at universities with teacher training students. Okay, but our first speaker of this part of the seminar is Elena Pezzi. She's a Spanish teacher from Italy, from working at Liceo Larrabassi in Bologna. She's also a teacher trainer in the field of digital technologies and works for the regional office of the Ministry of Education. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you here today, Elena, and looking forward to hear more from this activity that you were involved in over the last 2 years.
Okay, so thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting me to share my experience. I hope it will be interesting. The idea, well, it has been very interesting listen to Aileen, because she talked about well, the general concept of what I tried to do and to replicate both at school and at a regional level here in Italy. So the idea is using MOOCs in school, these experimentation within the framework of this School Education Gateway pilot, the school-based case study. Well, I don't know if. Okay, so the main ideas I'd like to share with you is first of all a little bit of context, what happened in my school and at the regional office. The main challenges I faced and how I tried to solve them. The positive aspects of the pilot, what worked well, and also the little difficult issues we had during the pilot itself. What lessons did I learn from the pilot, and some kind of advice that can be given to other schools or institutions, and if possible, next steps, future plans and ideas for further experimentation. So just a short explanation. As you have said, I've got two jobs. My first job is teacher of Spanish at Liceo Larrabassi. That's why my English is so poor. I'm a teacher of Spanish, an Italian teacher of Spanish, so you know. And this is one of the problems I will highlight in a while. Then I also work at the regional office of the Ministry of Education, so I can combine two different aspects, but two linked aspects, and that's me. Okay, so the idea is the added value of the study group I participated in and I tried to implement at school and at the regional office. MOOC can offer an experience of international community of peers. But if you combine this huge community of peers with a school-based community of peers, I mean study groups, you can reach a more effective teacher collaborative professional development. So what I tried to replicate at home was to combine a little study group and to integrate it within the international community of peers represented by MOOC. Well, this is a big, a complicated action plan, but the idea, the main idea, is that the pilot tried to involve groups of teachers in the implementation of the school-based case study and helping them to take MOOC with some face-to-face meetings at school or in another place that I will explain later on. So the idea of blended learning. The first idea started because in my school and in general in schools, the situation is that not so many teachers are so used to take MOOCs. MOOCs are still something quite unknown. Very few teachers take them. So my idea was to involve a group of teachers of my school. And I have to say that my school is a school formed by quite old teachers, experienced teachers, let me say. And we took the PBL course. The specificity of this course is that the course was already over, so we had more time to take the course. We decided to have more time to take the course, and we met twice a month, once every 2 weeks, to follow the course, to take the course, to do the activities that the course itself promoted. The second experimentation, the second part of the pilot, was at regional level. And as I worked there as a teacher trainer, I tried to involve other teachers, a different sort of teachers. Those teachers are teacher trainers. They are already experienced. They have already taken other MOOCs. So this was little different target of teachers, and there we took the Mentoring in Schools MOOC course. This course, we took the course at the same time and while the course was running online. So we met once a week to follow the course, and then we did other things. So main challenges. We have already mentioned lack of time. Teachers are always very busy. There's no good period to take a training course, online, on site. We are too busy, and the problem is that you start a course, but you feel a little bit stuck because you cannot do the homework that the course assigned to you. Moreover, in Italy, English is a problem. Well, I am the best example of lack of competences in English. English is a problem, not for everyone, of course, but for many teachers. And if I can say so, for those teachers who are more interested in taking the course, but they feel a little bit ashamed because they know that they cannot interact properly in English. Third issue, ICT. ICT, again, is a problem, not for everyone, of course, but for many teachers, yes, and maybe even more than English. So combining these three issues, I tried to find possible solutions. And one of the ideas was to combine online training and on-site training. We met together to work together and to do together activities proposed by the course itself. And we worked during the on-site meetings. Of course, as as we said before, it's not simply to reproduce the content of the online course, but you have to reshape the path, to summarize the main concepts, to provide time for the reflection on the topics, for the development of the activities. So you have to know the group of teachers you work with, and you have to know how to deal with on-site activities. Of course, meeting face-to-face helped those teachers with the less language and or ICT skills, because the group was formed by teachers of different subjects. And so we had teachers of English, teachers with quite good ICT skills, and so on. So this was a positive combination of different skills which made the group. Well, these are the opinions, the opinions of my fellow teachers. For them, it has been important to meet together to follow the course. Why? Because they found it, well, of course, much more enjoyable, but also more productive. They could work better. They could deepen the content of the course, of the MOOC. Of course, having a tutor who helps you and guides you is very useful. And this was about the structure, the design of the MOOC. They appreciated a lot the use of short videos, the activities that were very specific, the idea, the concept of the MOOC that they could develop during the face-to-face meetings. Well, of course, we experienced also some issues. The main issue, again, the lack of time. Time constraints at school, at personal level, often prevent the completion of the activities, but meeting together, knowing that you have a specific time to meet together, helped a lot to complete the course. And I have to say that more or less all the teachers who enrolled to the course completed the course too. So this was a great satisfaction. Well, too busy period at school, and for our Italian situation, the lack of official recognition. Whether you train or not, it's more or less the same. So it could be more enjoyable if teachers could have a sort of institutional recognition. The lesson I learned, basically, if you know your teacher's needs, skills, habits, it's better because you can better shape the face-to-face meetings, the face-to-face activities. You can adapt the content of the course. You can know the points where to focus on. So you can have a better life, if I can say so. Of course, the combination of online content and development of the MOOC and the on-site meetings has been the added value for my colleagues, for my teachers. Another idea is that for us it has been important to give time to teachers because the switch from the content of the MOOC and the application in the classroom is very important, and teachers wanted to experiment in class what they learned during the course. So we scheduled I scheduled a last meeting after some time to share the results of their working class. And the working class was also enriched by these peer observation that we called kind guests. I mean, a teacher went to another teacher's class to observe, to share, to do activities together. And this was the I think, the more effective part of the whole project, of the whole study group, because they worked together. They designed together, they planned together some activities. So to sum up, some very little advice, some things more: support from school leadership and administration is important. It's very important for the success of the concept, both at school level and, of course, more at regional level. The support of a regional director of the regional office is crucial, because he knows that spreading the word all over the region is important for the success. Teachers or teacher trainers with knowledge of the course topic can better facilitate the study group sessions. If the teacher trainer has already taken the course, for instance, this would facilitate a lot the development of the activities. School collaboration, of course, through shared study groups, to maximize benefits and minimize efforts, because it's true that you have to invest a huge amount of time to do this kind of activities, but if you do it together, it's of course the maximum of benefits. And again, recognition of teachers' work across the online course and the study group is important. So next steps, which are in fact some next and present steps, because I thought about a second and advanced level, not an advanced, intermediate level, second phase of this study group, involving the first trained teachers in a sort of a middle management group. So the first group who took the first course, helped me in the second phase of another MOOC, in another course, training course, and they were the facilitators. They could help other teachers. They could be there to listen to their issues, difficulties, and it has been really very effective. And the kind guests way of training could be implemented within the group. We found a very good practice, and a very to create this collaborative professional development that we mentioned before. At regional level, it has been important to involve teachers from all over the region, because they could spread, in a way, the word all over Emilia-Romagna. And they went to their school and they implemented the course, other courses, or the same course that we took together. And the idea is to organize at regional level a sort of meta course, I mean, involving the teachers who participated in the first phase, and while they are taking a MOOC, they are designing and planning and reflecting on how they could present this course to colleagues in their own school or in the area where they work. So this is the idea we are working on. Yeah, again, suggestions from participants, that it's something that we have already said, more or less. The idea of having courses that could last a little bit more than one module per week, because the idea, a lot of participants want to put in practice in classrooms. So they say that they would need a little bit more time to implement the activities, and also to document and to have a sort of follow-up after their work in class. To finish my sharing my ideas is now in coronavirus times, we cannot meet face to face, but as this way of learning together is so useful, we found it very useful, we tried to replicate the same structure, combining taking the course, the MOOC, and meeting together despite the distance and despite the fact that we cannot meet physically in presence. So we realized that we took the course at regional level this time, and this was easy because you don't have to move from your town, and at regional level we've got a platform for training courses, and I organized 2 courses both in March and now in October, with a regional group of teachers and digital trainers. We met via Meet, we worked together, we collaborated together with shared presentations, we worked together on a common Padlet, we shared our learning diaries, and again, with this idea of middle management group of teachers who already knew the way of working together in this way of learning, and we worked with those 2 groups of teachers. So more or less 70 teachers completed the course in this blended online way. Well, here you've got some reflections if you want to read them or to listen to them afterward, but it was really a pleasure for everyone. All the teachers who felt more ashamed, more less confident with English and ICT, and so they didn't want to participate in the online community. They felt more at ease, and they decided to participate in the forum, in online, in the bigger community, and so on. So it was really a very good experience. To sum up with few words, these study groups has been a great opportunity. Yes, of course, we faced some challenges, but the benefits were huge, and we hope for a recognition, but this is another story. So to sum up, let's MOOC together, because yes, we can, and we could do that.
Many thanks, Elena, and as was also commented in the chat, I think a really excellent example of gaining the kind of cost efficiency that Eileen mentioned. You know, you have these MOOCs out there, so why not make use of them? But even more important, really empowering colleagues who would probably never have considered using and participating in a MOOC, and giving them that confidence. And as you said, as a next step is, you know, taking those teachers who have completed the first round and now giving them also some responsibility and further disseminating that out. So it's exactly the kind of dynamic that I think is really powerful and can lead to greater changes. And I think coming back to one of the slides I showed right at the beginning is, you know, also what you did, it really addresses many of those challenges. There is a potential of organizing, for example, also accreditation with that model that you have used. If what you've done is done in an organization that has you know, the formal capacity to offer formal recognition, credits or whatever else it is. I know in Italy it's a bit more complicated, but in some countries that would theoretically be possible. So
but anyway, at regional level, the regional office gives the official certificate. It combines both sides, the MOOC certificate, but also the regional certificate for completing the course. So it's a sort of official recognition. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Excellent. Many thanks, Elena.
Thank you.
We'll see if there's some questions still coming up. Maybe at a later stage to come back to you. But let's for now move on to our next speaker. Just take back control of the slides. There we go. So our next speaker from Denmark is Søren Jørgensen, who's a pedagogical consultant and project manager at the Danish National Knowledge Center for e-learning. Søren will talk about blended learning and teacher training within the vocational education sector in Denmark. So pleasure to have you here with us, Søren, tonight. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Benjamin, and thank you for the invitation. I want to start out also by thanking Eileen and Bronwyn for excellent contributions. I hope that some of the things that they've been pointing at will resonate in my short presentation. Also, thank you to Elena. What a great example on ways of using a MOOC. Let me see if I've got control on the presentation. So I do. I've put a title to my presentation, which is called "We Want to Learn Something Meaningful in a Meaningful Way." This is like a synthesis of feedback we've gotten from...
Søren, sorry to interrupt. You need to press the take control button. I think you can move the slides, but we don't see when you move them. So you should see a take control button somewhere. Yeah, excellent.
I hope it's working now.
Yes, now it's working.
Oh,
perfect.
Sorry about that. I've given a title to my short presentation, which is like as I said, a short synthesis of a general feedback we've been getting for years back when we did more classic teacher training, which was we want to learn something meaningful in a meaningful way. And we took up this feedback, and we've been working with a teacher training course with blended learning in the Danish vocational education sector. And I will share with you my and my colleagues' experience with that. And I hope it will provide you with some discussions points on how to maybe get a better effect of teacher training in general. I won't be telling you much about me. I don't think that's necessary, but I represent the Danish Knowledge Center for e-learning, where we do mainly consultancies and project management within ICT and education. We also do program evaluation for agencies and different ministries, but we also do teaching, and we have a minor teacher training program, and this is what I'm going to touch upon in this short presentation. What are we talking about when we talk about e-learning? We are a National Knowledge Center for e-learning. Well, of course, we're talking about what Eileen was also differing between learning face-to-face, of course, with the purposeful use of IT and media. But we also talk about e-learning in the form where we only learn online using web access to communicate and collaborate across time and space. And then we're talking about this third form, which is the topic also, of course, of this seminar, the meaningful integration of face-to-face and online learning. I think Eileen just touched shortly on a definition of this, and this is what I'll be looking more into together with you. Let me just get back to what this quotation rests upon. As I said, this is like a synthesis of the general feedback we've been getting when we used to do classic teacher training. We got it from our participants, and let me just give you a short remarks on who our participants are. They are teachers in the vocational education sector. This means that they teach mainly in non-academic classes. Many of them have several, much more than I do, years of teaching experience. They have a background in business. This means they're not trained as teachers initially. They are highly motivated, beautifully, and even some of them are passionate about the subject and content. But some of them has a very limited knowledge and also limited interest in pedagogy and didactics in general, and that poses us with the slide of a challenge. Also, they have a limited interest in sharing experience with their colleagues. Often, they've been teaching for years without sharing and reflecting together with colleagues. We think that some of this has to do with this quotation. We want to learn something meaningful in a meaningful way. Number one and number two main challenges relates to these 2 points, I think. To learn something meaningful, we need to maybe move away from the classic teacher training, which in at least among our participants has a bit of a bad reputation. Arlene did touch upon this as well. It's quite time consuming because even though we are a rather small country, it's time consuming moving back and forth between home or workplace and to our on-site workshop, which were up to 9 times. It used to be that. Also, when they're on site and on a face-to-face workshop, they work far from everyday practice. So the transfer effect from being on a workshop and going out and try out things is very low. Or used to be very low in our classic teacher training. Let me get back to them in a learning something in a meaningful way. They used to learn a lot from, or we used to train teachers in a way where us as instructors, pedagogical consultants, were supposed to be seen as peers, and we would guide them. But we have limited insights into the challenges of the daily challenges our participants face in their job, which means that we're not able to relate really to the pedagogical challenges they face. And other participants are more that. So that's why we've moved on to this organization of blended learning that I will present to you. Our overall objective with the course, which is called Education and Digital Learning, is to give already experienced teachers competencies in ICT and learning, and doing that by letting them designing and develop their own course with e-learning during the course that we take them through. We have an objective that says that teaching and learning activities with us should be meaningful by being to a wide extent based on participants' own experience, their own attitudes, and their own ambitions with being on the course. This is also something that is quite new to our course. And then I should say that we design for integrating prior experience to provide inclusion and inspiration between our participants, and then strong relations. And by strong relations, I mean we design for relations between us as instructors and our participants, but also between our participants and between our participants and their own students and pupils. We believe that this more social view on learning has a great effect on the transfer and the experience of learning something meaningful. So how do we create integration? What you see in front of here is one module on our blended learning course. We start out by a face-to-face workshop on site here in Aarhus, where I'm based. So you will have to move across country to show up at this workshop. Afterwards, we move on to a period of maybe 2 to 3 weeks, which takes place in our online learning environment. We use Moodle, where we plan up to 6, maybe 8 hours of activities in that period of 2 to 3 weeks. Then we meet up for 1 day for 6 hours at Adobe Connect, where we present and discuss our experience. And then we move onwards to another period or more a new time period where we work in Moodle. Eileen did raise the question of what face-to-face activities do we plan for? Well, most of the time on our face-to-face workshop, we spend on introducing. We introduce and clarify expectations to one another. We also introduce our platform. So when we get to the crucial point where you need to be able to use Moodle and Adobe Connect, we try to avoid people having technical difficulties by introducing it on our face-to-face workshop. We identify with one another. We identify our own ambitions with being on the course, but we also identify with the other participants. This means we do a little task where we tell stories about ourselves, our experience, the target group we're working with. even though we're not working with the same target groups across our participants. We start collaborating. We do little collaborative tasks. We test different medias and stuff, but not to use these medias in our own courses, but actually only to start relating to each other. And we find that this is quite crucial, because when we get to the online time periods, either if it's on Moodle or Adobe Connect, we think that this process of getting to knowing each other on a face-to-face workshop really is beneficial for people relating to each other online. I think other people have commented on that in the chat as well. When we move on to working on our online learning, we start collaborating, but this time to create and design our own course, or our participants do. We inspire each other by sharing our experience when we try things out in our daily practice. Don't forget that this sequence on Moodle plays out on a time of up to 2 to 3 weeks, and this enables people to or our participants to reflect in their own pace. They can go out and try things out in between the daily routines and tasks. And this seems to create a space for them to reflect on their own practice, where they're not on a gun hold like they would be in a workshop where we tell people to give answers with only a limited time to think on it. On our Adobe Connect sequences, we show up to present our experience. All our participants give presentations of what they've done in the meantime. We discuss things, but also we as instructors, we devote a lot of time on these to give individual guidance and feedback to our participants. And then we set them up to another period or sequence where they work and design on their own course, and we give each other feedback in our online environment and guidance from us as instructors. During our course, we run through this module 3 times. So the course ends up with this this plan on this organization, with exactly the same organization and the same purpose of the different events taking place, but we shift focus during the course. We start out with one module where we focus on organizing e-learning. This means we make the plan for the course they develop. Next on, we in the next module, we look at facilitating e-learning, and we have short presentation and framing of the theoretical issues of facilitating e-learning, and then they go on to do further reflections and tryouts in their own course, building their own course, and then actually after the second run of this module, we have a quite crucial point where our participants are supposed to go out and try the course out, or as far as it had been designed, test it out in real life with their own students, getting real feedback from their students, which they will bring on to our third face-to-face workshop and try and elaborate it and reflect on it together with all our other participants. So does it work? We've gotten some feedback from our participants, which gives an idea of that it works. We've got a participant here who reported that I think it worked out well. Great with feedback from a person who really had engaged with my own course. And the person here referred to is actually a peer. It's not me as an instructor or one of my colleagues. It's another participant who has run some of the same courses and is familiar with the subject and the target group of this respondent. It worked out really well. Here's a feedback from another participant. It actually seems like the instructors, that would be me, have increased time to talk and guide during these online sessions in Adobe Connect compared to classroom sessions where I'm more all over the place. So on these Adobe Connect sessions, we seem to get established a kind of focus, which some of our participants give good feedback on. Of course, there are nuances to this work, because here we've got some feedback from another participant. I did expect more time to focus on our own course instead of relating to the course of other participants. There is, of course, something to be learned from giving feedback to other participants. It's just that right now we're busy with developing our own courses. And this is the balance that we try to keep. How social should we be going in terms of also giving them time to build on their own courses? Also, this is something we get different feedback from, which is also dependent on what you personally prefer. One of the things that can make our Adobe sessions, where we're online for 6 hours, work is a strict time schedule. We start out by saying good morning, and we clarify our expectation by going through the program of the day. And then our participants are on to actually just working in groups on designing their course. And then we shift between different groups and we give them feedback. And this is where the participants from before had an experience of getting maybe a more focused feedback than they're used to from our on-site workshops. We have a strict timetable, which is shared with our participants in Moodle. In the morning, when we give them feedback, we give them a task, and they're supposed to solve that task during the day, sharing it in Moodle, our online learning environment. And we would do a follow-up on that in the afternoon when we get back to every groups. So here you see we've got this strict time schedule. Whether it's too strict, as Eileen or maybe Ronin did touch upon, as it is for now, I think we can't be too strict. We haven't reached the point yet where we have been too strict. That's for sure. Here you see a screen dump from our forum. You won't be able to make much sense of this because this is all in Danish. But this is just to show you that we do have a lot of activity and actually more than we did expect on our online forum. Because we were initially faced with some of the problems that some of you have posed. How do we get people to contribute online? I think, and that is also the feedback from some of our participants, that one of the keys to getting to this point where everybody contributes is that you need to put up very visible criteria for the kind of feedback that you're supposed to give. And also, this is not the first task they do online. We start out in a very low-key manner, and when they get to know each other during the course and when they've been meeting up at the face-to-face workshops, we can set off into more advanced forum tasks where they give feedback to certain appointed groups and stuff like that. So this is also an expression of people working together online because they have met and been familiar with each other on face-to-face workshops. But I feel I've been maybe showing all our good experiences with this blending learning course, but I think it's also very important to state that this is not just it took a big effort to design this course and to revise it through the last couple of years. And it's not just a matter, of pulling back this ball and letting it go and then releasing a fine mechanism and effects of events just lying on the string and going automatically on each other. This takes a lot of effort to and this doesn't happen in a straightforward way either. As with blended learning, teaching nor learning never seems to happen in a straightforward way, and neither does this blended learning course of ours. it takes a big effort in planning, and also a lot of follow-up activities during the course. And what do we do to prevent that things go back to normal when the course ends? Because that's one of our big difficulties, which we haven't solved yet. Well, we think it has something to do with local and very persistent follow-up activities. Some of you, I think Elena also touched upon that. What task and do we put to school leadership in this regard to make things not go back to normal? I think if you see the picture in this in the background, I think we should think more of our course as a lot of balls we release downhill in the streets of San Francisco. Every ball will jump around and get to the bottom eventually, but they won't follow the same path, even though we've planned for it. And some balls need a bit more push and guidance to get them there. But a thing we're going to experiment with this next spring is a parallel course for our participant managers and leaders to give them competencies in creating change in schools when they've got, when the teachers return from our course. What do leaders and managers do to implement the new competencies? What we also need is acknowledgement of blended learning as a meaningful, and I'm sorry to say, not in our instance, not a cost-efficient alternative to classic teacher training, because this is what we offer is the most expensive course on ICT and learning in Denmark right now. So this also means that to make our course work better, we need better terms for cost-heavy teacher training, which this is an example for. I think I want to say thank you for now, and give room for some questions. Maybe Benjamin will try and facilitate that.
Many thanks, Søren. Really interesting overview there of what you're doing, and I think that fits very well into what the kind of model that Eileen was describing in her presentation. So, I mean, it reflects to a significant degree some of those models that Eileen was presenting there.
It was a great relief to see Eileen's presentation, I must say.
Yeah, good. Nice to hear that. That fits very well. I think you've of course raised a couple of key issues that might be worth addressing in a question or in a follow-up. For now, there's no questions or something like that in the chat. So, and also as we're also running a bit behind schedule, I'd like to move on to the final presentation from Sandra, and then to raise some maybe additional questions right at the end. Come back to you, Søren. But many thanks.
Thank you.
So our final, now hold on, I need to go back to the slides. I have to jump through quite a few slides now. Let's see.
So, Ben, I don't need a slide if it's not a slide from you.
Yes, okay, that's a good point. Thanks for reminding me, Sandra. I'll nevertheless, because I'll have to come back to that anyway. So our next speaker is Sandra Schön from the Technical University in Graz, Austria. And Sandra is also a project manager for a project in the field of new media and teaching in Austria, as far as I know, as far as I understand. And also you're involved in quite a few open education initiatives in Austria. So really excited to hear about the project that you were working on, which looked at using MOOCs in initial teacher training at university level in Austria. So over to you, Sandra.
Thanks to you. Thanks for the invitation and all the contributors so far. I'm happy. I'm hopefully able to contribute with some slightly different experiences and perspectives onto the topic. So please have a look onto my video stream, because I would like to share my presentation in my video. I make me a little bit smaller. So I'm working for the education technology team at the university, which is responsible, first of all, for all the e-learning issues. So currently it's relatively more important than it was before. And we are as well hosting a MOOC platform. And that's my background, or the background of my team. So what is so typical for iMOOCs? It is if you pronounce it in German or in Austrian German, it is pronounced like I like it. But of course you can pronounce it as iMOOCs anyway. It's an MOOC platform which had already about 100 courses, about 60,000 registered participants, and we had courses so far always on a university level, but for students, for pupils, for lifelong learning, for different topics as well. Mostly in German, partly in English, and multilingual. What is a special issue is that all courses are or licensed under Creative Commons license, which has some impacts on the possibilities to collaborate with us or with the courses. I hope I'm not sure how many you have heard about open educational resources, but these open licenses allow you not only to use the materials we use in the course, but as well to remix, to store, to modify, and to reuse it right after the course if you want to. So this is part of the idea of how we want to bring education into the world. So far, a second perspective of our background is that as we are part of a university, we had made experiences with several different types of integration of MOOCs in university teaching, and one of these types I want to present today. And but if you're interested in, you can as well go on and have a look on to the other types. So basing on our idea that typically you plan, but of course there are different ways to deal with the term blended learning. We see it as always a variation or an approach to bring some technology aspects into face-to-face learning. And we try to consider a different term which highlights the issue that if we talk about online courses, so pure online courses, we always try, not always, but sometimes we try to figure out how to bring them back into reality, face-to-face, what the people consider as part of their lives. And so we coined the term inverse blended learning, especially, for example, if we try to develop local learners meetings in parallel to our courses, so the MOOCs. One example which got us an award today, happily, is the EB MOOC Plus. It's a MOOC for adult educators, which is under open license available, and where the several thousand adult educators in Austria and in the German-speaking world got ideas how to include technologies into their adult education. And the very special thing was it was not only a MOOC, it was planned and supported by a variety. So I have the number here, I guess, 40 local groups and partners. So adult education institution which supported the course by providing face-to-face meetings, seminars, meetups, as well as some virtual meetings as well in parallel to the MOOC. And of course, they got a intense training before. There was an intense local partner search as well. So it's not that this is just for chance or out of luck or out of marketing issues. This is really intense work. But then you have what we call a situation where we took the online course and blended it with face-to-face issues and possibilities. And before that background, we and my colleagues were asked to develop a new curricula for teacher training. Background of this is as well that Martin Ebner, which I have to excuse for this talk now. He's still in the meeting of the ministry, obviously, otherwise he would be there. He's responsible as well for teacher education, of part of that, of this the southeast region of Austria. And together with the 6 related universities which are cooperating on that topic, they were asked to develop a curricula on digital competencies for teacher trainings. And they as well decided that it would make sense to have a common base, to develop a MOOC as a common base, and then to have local trainings within the universities with the possibilities they see there. So the plan looked like that. The lecture, so we have several lectures on that curricula. So one in summer semester, one winter semester, and the first round was in 2019. So the lecture itself, formally it's a lecture with an exercise, and the lecture itself was planned as a MOOC on our platform, available as well, not only for the students, but for the others who were interested in it. And in parallel, we had exercises within the universities on our part of our partners. So what they got there, the students, they got their assignments and additional information within the learning management system, and as well face-to-face appointments. And what they did there was especially that they were asked to develop a learning video on a topic which fits to their background, because there were a lot of variety of disciplines and people and teacher in that groups. Part of the final exam were the questions that they have learned as part of the MOOC, and as well the videos they made. So here you can see how the MOOC looked like. So this is just an ordinary X MOOC. So it's a MOOC where you have typically at least one video, then some texts, some PDFs eventually, and a quiz per unit. And this MOOC had six units, all about the topic of digital media in schools and teaching. And therefore, of course, it was obviously a very nice idea to have a MOOC for talking and teaching about that kind of stuff. So concerning some numbers, you see we had a variety of people joining at
Sandra,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt briefly. I don't know if it's a bandwidth issue at my end or if it's a general issue. Some of the slides, it's very difficult to read because it's very fuzzy, very grainy. So I don't know if it's a bandwidth issue at my end or your end, or if there's anything maybe bandwidth wise you can do at your end. Because at the moment I can't read, for example, this slide. Just to flag it up. So to mention, if it's not possible, then just maybe mention the numbers, such.
Sorry, I cannot change something here, and of course I can read it. Sorry if it's up. I don't know. I don't think that it's about my connection, because my connection is pretty good here. I'm sitting in a cellar with a big, typically with a good connection. So sorry if you cannot read that. I hope that you can read it if you are interested in, if you have the slides finally. So we had about 1,000 and nearly 500 registered participants in the MOOC, and about 730 got a certification so that they were successfully participating at all units of the MOOC, and about 600 were students. So they not only take successfully part at the MOOC, but as well successfully at the final exam and group work. So about practically 130 people were part of the MOOC, but were obviously no students. I don't think that we had so many students which weren't taking part at the exams. And then in so this year, of course, we had a big change, but practically it wasn't such a big change for that specific lecture, because what was planned as a face-to-face meeting in 2019 now got online. So the universities planned their face-to-face meeting as online meetings. Of course, it got complicated because we didn't really have the time to change the assignment, and making a video is possible, of course, as well, if you are sitting in your home and have eventually limited possibilities concerning cameras, etc. But we had not really the time to re-plan and re-text our assignment so that it would be perfectly fitting to the situation. Of course, because I think this is very known from all the other people here as well. So this was my story, what we did at the Graz University of Technology, together with six other universities, to use a MOOC as a lecture, as a common lecture, and to use it as a base. And I want to highlight eventually, especially addressing Eileen's idea about that MOOCs are kind of cost efficient sometimes. Yes, I guess this was part of the game here as well. But what I've learned so far is that the partners were pretty happy about the cooperation and that common MOOC as a base, because especially because of a way to deal with quality assurance. Because not all partners and the teacher at universities there were pretty comfortable talking about digital technologies in teaching. So this is eventually a final word from my side. And I hope that you can read all our references, etc., when you see the slides after the talk, if you are not possible to read, as Ben addressed it already.
Many thanks, Sandra. We will share the slides, as I've mentioned also in the chat, after the as part of the report that we will send out after the seminar. So anything that wasn't possible to read in the slides can be checked up there later on. I think just as a quick feedback, Sandra, I mean the main text I could usually read, but the more smaller text or numbers were not possible to read. But I think we got a clear understanding of what you were presenting, of course. So many thanks for that. I think also a really interesting exercise that you engaged on there, and I think really taking forward or sort of a similar idea to a certain extent what Elena was presenting, where you see that kind of face-to-face element at school or regional level, then implemented at a university level and at initial teacher training level. So overall, I hope that all these different examples, I think quite diverse examples, have offered some interesting insights and ideas for the development of blended learning in teacher education and training. Please, if there are any questions or comments at this stage, do not hesitate to put them into the chat or to raise your hand and to take the floor. Please, this is a good opportunity to address your questions to these three experienced practitioners who've embarked on these, I think, three very interesting examples. I think in the meantime, maybe while we wait for someone to come forward, one of the questions that I have, which in a way is relevant for all three of the previous speakers, but maybe more for Søren and for Sandra, is in regards to the level of strictness you use when designing, especially the asynchronous online activities. Because Søren, you said that in the synchronous online activities, so the Adobe Connect meeting, you are very strict. But the question, I guess, is more about the asynchronous activities. How much guidance, I mean, do you need to give, for example, in the forum as part of that? And I think the same, is relevant for you, Sandra, in regards to the activities that were done as part of the MOOCs in this exercise. How do we design those asynchronous activity in such a way that we can engage the participants, the teachers, in such a context? And of course, the blended element being important here as a first step into that online sphere. So we've addressed that integrated aspect a couple of times. You've addressed it in your presentations, and we've previously addressed it in the discussion. But nevertheless, it still seems to be sometimes an issue to then still draw people really into that online exchange. Can you maybe tell us a bit about how you approach that? Søren, maybe if we start with you, yes.
Yeah, thank you. And I must say, Ben, you hit us at a soft spot. Maybe you recall that I said that this course it requires a big effort from us, partly because of a lot of follow-up activities, and these follow-up activities are actually placed when we work together with our participants, out of time and space when they when we engage in our online learning community. And I think some of our follow-up and a lot of our follow-up activities could be scaled down if we were better to make plans for how to interact online. What we do is actually we make individual plans for what our participants are going out to try out. And when we're supposed to meet up again, or when we will give them written feedback on what to try out next, or maybe what to reflect on. So we try actually to bring it down to a very hands-on level where we just discuss different things that they could try and reflect on, and when they should when they expect to try things out, so we could time our feedback to them at the right manner. But because we're not that good at making these, like making a standard plan for these sequences when they try things out, we do spend a lot of time on follow-up activities. So you hit us on a soft spot there.
Many thanks, Søren. Elna, Sandra, I mean, Elna, I was wondering maybe in regards to your experience, did you see that also the case that there's a lack of engagement in the online, like the MOOC that you were working with of your colleagues? Did you also see that happening in your experience, and how did you maybe address it? And just to acknowledge quickly, I see there's a hand up from an attendee, from Keith Topping. So I'll come to you in a moment, Keith. Let's just give an opportunity for Sandra and for Elna to still respond.
Okay. What we see as well is that the communication in the online course is not similar to other online courses, because the majority of that special online course were the students. And of course, they know it's a public sphere. And I guess it's not about a shyness, but of course, it's not so comfortable to share experiences with a big bunch of people you don't know, as always. And as they have a certain different second channel, because they are as well part of their group within their university, I guess they prefer to share their thoughts and things there, because it's a closed rare private room, and a better, eventual, more comfortable way to share as well mistakes, things you don't know. But of course, there were a lot of communication, because practically, as we highlighted the topic of a learning video, because they should develop and produce a learning video within their groups and in the assignments, they were discussing practically the videos of the MOOC, and were asking, why did you do this, or wouldn't it better that, etc. So it was again part of the MOOC, what they have done in parallel, but in a quite different way. But for me, it's not, so we don't see a big thing in the case or in the status that they don't share in a similar way as they do in the parallel groups, because I think it's part of the microdidactics of this thing, as long as they are communicating and sharing things. And I think I would feel eventually more comfortable as well in my smaller group on my university's level, then it's quite okay for us. But of course, that doesn't mean that we cannot do something better.
But I think you raise a really important point. Effectively, if this is extended, then you could end up with an online environment that is very dead. I mean, if everybody just then starts interacting in their small face-to-face setting, then it can become a problem. And I mean, I think we should also add that there's the opposite example from I think King et al, which Eileen highlighted, where it did seem actually that the kind of confidence gained in those small scale discussions did feed into the online sphere as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
But I think it's part as well of our target group. So I think as far as we have seen that in our MOOCs, students are quite different as, for example, adults or lifelong learners.
Yeah. Okay, many thanks, Sandra. I do want to give the opportunity for Keith to raise his question, who's raised his hand. Keith, please, the floor is yours.
Eleanor, I want to talk to you. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Good, good. I thought your presentation was wonderful.
Thank you.
And I thought your English was very, very clear.
I don't see you any longer. I don't hear you. Sorry.
Keith, you're muted again.
No, I should be unmuted now.
Yes,
Okay,
now we can
yeah.
hear you again.
Okay. But what you were saying was that with your blended model, you managed to achieve 100% completion of the MOOC activities. Now, normally in a MOOC, 20% would be considered good for completion. Your 100% is enormously different. So that really represents spectacular success, and I congratulate you on it.
Thank you. I have to be honest, not 100%. I can say 85%, because, you know, what I said before, time constraints, busy period, and so on. But it's true, and I consider it a great success, not for me, but for my colleagues, for teachers, because they were very, very happy at the end of the course, because they said we could do it. We could achieve something that we wanted to do, but in other occasions we couldn't achieve because of some external constraints. What I was saying before was all the teachers start a course with a great willingness, desire, interest, but, you know, life, job, and so on. So having the opportunity to work together, to meet together, both online, on site, it doesn't matter. The importance is to be a part of a group, and the group, you know, helps. And it was really, and they, you know, I don't know how to say it in English, the circolo virtuous circle. Well, I don't know, but if you do something good, you are more willing to do other good things and to engage more deeply in what you are doing. So I found, and my colleagues at school are, as I said before, quite old in every sense of the word, but they have started a new way of learning together, of collaborating together, and this is for me a very, very positive situation. And at regional level also, we have created a network of teacher trainers throughout the region. So this is a very, very positive situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Many thanks, Keith. Many thanks, Elena. And I just want to pick up on one important point, Elena, that you also raises. In a way, you said it doesn't matter necessarily if it's online or face-to-face. It's maybe more about the synchronicity. I think that's the right word. So, I mean, you did, and you've explained that in your presentation, you did your study group concept also during this pandemic online. You learned together in a study group. You did it in a synchronous online meeting, so to speak. And I think Bronwyn earlier in the conversation to a certain extent also addressed that point. Okay, yeah, so I think a lot of interesting points. Are there any further questions or comments from the attendees to this meeting? I see a comment here from Eileen about how we discussion prompts are framed in MOOCs and how that produces different kinds of responses.
Yeah, I agree with low-risk activities. Above all, for those teachers who don't feel at ease with online training or Yeah.
Okay, many thanks. I think it's we're a bit over schedule anyway, so it's quite late in the day as well. Many thanks for all the excellent contributions today. I think there's been a ton of information, a ton of examples. Really appreciate the input from all the speakers, and I hope that for the attendees, for the participants of today's session, you've got some ideas and some inspiration. As mentioned, we will follow up more formally with a report where the literature review from Eileen Kennedy will be shared, as well as short summaries from the 3 practice examples that you've heard about today. I do want to raise one final question before you leave with you. So I'm going to share my I've lost it. My browser again with you. I hope you can see it, because it would be interesting to get from those of you who are here an input into what we should be focusing on in next year's thematic seminar. We did the same exercise last year, November or December, which was before the whole pandemic, and actually the result of that was to focus on blended learning. So despite the whole situation with the pandemic, there was a clear interest in this already. So if you could take a moment to give us some feedback about what topics you would be interested to hear about next year, go to the Menti, put in the code, and rank the topics in order of interest. Yeah. With that, I want to say a big thank you again to all the presenters. A thank you to my colleagues Ina and Effie, but also a very big thank you, of course, to everybody who joined this meeting today. As mentioned, I hope it's giving you some interesting ideas and inspiration to work with. And I hope to see you engage in future activities organized by the European Schoolnet Academy and European Schoolnet in general, of course. Of course, everybody is also very welcome to check out and look at the courses that we have on the European Schoolnet Academy itself. So, see responses slowly coming in here. I'm going to put the code into the chat, so feel free to still respond as I close this meeting. Will be useful to get your input into this as we move into next year's thematic seminar. We will also share together with the report a more general quick feedback on the seminar for you, so you have an opportunity to also send some feedback to us via that. With that, I close the meeting and say thanks again to everyone. And just before I forget, let me put that code into the chat. There we go. Okay, best wishes and good evening to everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
See you. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.